So today we're interviewing Lynn Fraser. She's a yoga teacher and master facilitator of Himalayan breathwork, as well as a senior living inquiries facilitator for the work of Scott Kiloby. So welcome, Lynn.
Thank you.
So the living inquiries, what brought you to the living inquiries and what are they?
The living inquiries are something that Scott Kiloby developed. And what really attracted me to them is that it's a way of looking at words, images, and how they're Velcroed to sensation or energy in our body. I met Scott through a friend, Jerry Katz, who was coming out to Alberta, where I lived then in Canada. And Scott was going to be at a conference there, and I went down and participated in the conference for the weekend. Worked a little bit with him privately. That was in 2009, I think it was. And then in 2012, I moved to Nova Scotia and I started doing some training with him and became a living inquiries facilitator. Prior to that, I'd been involved with the Himalayan tradition, teaching meditation and yoga since the early 90s.
So you've been at this for quite a while.
Yes, I've been practicing meditation for about 25 years and teaching for 20.
Okay. So I know that the living inquiries applies to people with addiction, and Scott Kiloby has a recovery center in Rancho Mirage near Palm Springs. So in your practice, how do you see his living inquiries and the natural rest for addiction work with your clients? How does it yield better outcomes?
So the living inquiries and natural rest for addiction are a way that people can be very present with their own experience. And oftentimes what's happening with our own experience is that we're kind of scared to go inside and to really feel what's going on. And that makes sense if we've experienced trauma, which most people have. And trauma is a real underpinning of addiction. It's a lot of what drives us into addiction is that we want to escape our present moment experience. The living inquiries give us a way to be present with that in a supportive, safe environment. And what part of what creates that safety is that it's a very gentle, non-aggressive form of inquiry. And that if we are working with a facilitator, then we have someone else there to be present with us and to help hold the space for us to be present with our own experience. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about trauma and how I see that work, and then we'll get into the addiction. All addictions, and when I say addiction, I'm really talking about a continuum from things that we distract ourselves with to things that are what would be commonly termed as addiction. So there are a lot of different ways that people take the pressure off a little bit, and some of them are fairly harmless. You know, it doesn't really make a big difference in our life if we spend Friday nights, you know, watching Netflix because we've had a hard week at work, or if we have a couple of drinks and we're not addicted to it. There's a lot of things that are fun, that are helpful, that are social things that we do that don't really have a big negative impact on our life. So a lot of this is how much we do it, how compulsive it is, and what kind of impact it has on our life. We might get into something like working a lot, which is socially sanctioned. We get a lot of approval for that, especially if we're making good money and we're having a productive career. We could get into sports or something like that. There's a real adrenaline rush in some of the extreme sports in particular. So we can use almost anything addictively. And then there's all of the things that are recognized as addictions. Eating and drinks, alcohol, other drugs, gambling, sex and porn, all of those things. And the thing that all of those have in common is that they take us out of our present moment experience, or they numb it a little bit. They distract us. There's something about it that helps us to not be feeling what's going on in the present moment. So one of the things that underlies the discomfort in the present moment is energy in our body that doesn't feel quite safe to be present with. And that's what really attracted me to Scott's work, was that we're really working with why is it feels uncomfortable in the body to have an experience in the body of being kind of scared. And when we're scared of it, this is all unconscious level stuff. It's not something that we're thinking, oh, I'm scared of my body, I'm scared of my energy. It's more just a reluctance to be present with it. And this is where the tie into trauma comes, because if we were experiencing things in our younger years when we were overwhelmed, we were being hurt, we didn't know how to handle it, then we're going to have that stored as energy in our body, and we're going to have associated memories with it. So as a meditation teacher, I know a lot about the mind. I know how the mind works. I know a lot about thought. And I hadn't really made that connection with, in this direct way that Scott does with the living inquiries, of prior experiences being stored in the body as trauma, and that those experiences are stored with the associated memories. And we can look at those three elements and see exactly what it is that's going on. We can see the words, and we can, there might be words of what someone has said to us. Perhaps someone has said something really mean to us, or, if it's a childhood thing, like, who the hell do you think you are, or something like that. We have those words in our head, and then we have an associated memory of, maybe we have an image in our mind of being in the kitchen with one of our parents who was saying that to us. And we can look at it, it's like we're looking at it of our own eyes. We're right in the experience. And that's part of what makes it hard to be present and why we want to escape from it. When it was happening in the first place, we might have dissociated, we might have mentally left the room, we might have gotten angry. There's all kinds of things that might be triggered as it was happening, but it's not happening now. Those things aren't happening to us anymore. Those are experiences that we had, that we've survived. And we've probably formed beliefs about ourselves and about life based on those experiences.
How does somebody know if what they're doing is an addictive pattern? Because some of the things that you mentioned, we do every day.
It would be something that people would have to really kind of pay some attention to what it is that's happening in their own experience. So if it feels, for instance, like we don't have any control over it, or we're seeing a repetitive pattern, the brain and the nervous system are very habitual, and we'll tend to go in really predictable patterns. There's certain kinds of thoughts that will come up repetitively. There's certain kinds of rituals that we might have. So for instance, for myself, when I was 12, I had some traumatic experiences that were happening, and that continued on for quite a few years. And at 12, I didn't have reliable access to drugs and alcohol, although I did them whenever I got the chance. But I always had access to ice cream. And so that became very associated in my whole being with safety and relief and comfort. And over the years, I would have this kind of energy that would come up in my throat that would go, "Give me some ice cream." And it would feel cool and sweet, and it would calm that energy in my throat. So when I'm eating ice cream addictively, that's what's going on. There's some kind of energy in my throat. I'm getting that kind of message in some way. I might have an image of an ice cream cone. I might have some words about it, or it might just pop into my mind that maybe instead of going this way on the way home, I should go the other way and go get some ice cream. Now that's very different from if I'm out with my grandchildren and it's a sunny afternoon and we're going to get ice cream. And if that's the case, I might have an ice cream cone, I might not have an ice cream cone, but I'm not using it to get away from my experience.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's a good distinction. So in that scenario that you mentioned, how would you work with somebody that's having those images of ice cream or alcohol? Like, how do the living inquiries actually work?
That's a really good question. One of the things that we do is a lot of work with being in the body. Scott wrote a book called Natural Rest for Addiction, and the natural rest part of it is really important. He also did a lot of he also did some work around what exactly it is that happens in our mind and in our bodies when we're doing that. So we have this ghost image that will sometimes come in. An example of what happened to me one time, I live at the ocean now, so I get to walk on the beach a lot, which is really cool. But also sometimes people have their dogs on the beach, and sometimes they don't have them under control. So I'm walking along, all of a sudden from behind me, which is also, I wasn't really noticing that there was a dog. It was several hundred feet away, but it came rushing up behind me and barking and snarling and came out and touched my leg, although it didn't bite me. And I got scared, and I turned around and I engaged with the people whose dog it was. I said, please get your dog under control. It scared me. The dog is still kind of lunging, and it was scary. So we had a little couple of words about, well, my dog won't hurt you and all that stuff, which of course doesn't make any difference to my level of fear. And I calmed down, and they left. I went a different direction, and I'm walking along the beach, and I'm just working with my breath. I'm recognizing how activated my body is, and also that the threat's over. The dog didn't actually hurt me. And then a few minutes later, I have this image pop into my mind about opening the door to the pizza delivery. And I can smell the pizza. I'm safe at home in my apartment. And I get to have the comfort of watching a movie and eating pizza, which is something they used to do a lot. And that was a real anchor for me. And so when that came into my mind, I thought, it's 2 p.m. I'm not hungry. Why is that all of a sudden popping into my mind? And because I've been doing work with the compulsion inquiry, I recognized it as my body and my system are coming up and going, you're scared, let's settle down. What's a good way to do that? Get some pizza. So that's one of the things that we would start to work with the compulsion inquiry, is noticing that when we're driven to do certain things, it's driven usually with words or pictures and energy in the body.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned compulsion inquiry. Are there different types of inquiries?
Right. So there's 3. There's the living inquiries there's actually quite a few that we work with. We weave them in together. The 3 major living inquiries are the unfindable inquiry, and the anxiety inquiry, and the compulsion inquiry. So the living inquiries, where we're looking for a self, is the unfindable inquiry. And we're looking to see, we have all of these experiences, and is that me? Is that me? Is that a self? And so that's what we're looking for. And one of the basic things that we talk about a lot and look at a lot is core deficiency stories. So we have experiences. For instance, if I was, to use my own life as an example, I had the experience of not feeling safe as a teenager and not being seen. And my parents actually went to some trouble to ignore what was actually going on. And I felt like I didn't have anybody was paying attention. Nobody seemed to notice the distress that I was in. And any noticing that was happening was of a punitive nature. It was just like, what's the matter with you? Why are you doing that? We need to stop you doing that kind of thing. And so I had the experience of being unloved. That's how it felt. But does that mean that I'm actually unlovable? And oftentimes when we have that experience, it turns into a belief. So one of the things that we do is we look at the evidence for that. So I've had experiences of feeling that way. Does that mean that I'm unlovable? Can I find a self, a person who's unlovable? And as we look through, what we see is we have all kinds of evidence from past experiences. We have energy in our body. It feels a certain way when we tap into that. Other people might have a story of, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, I'll never be good enough. And we tend to have a lot of evidence and stories around that that's attached to it. So when we're working with that, we might be looking for the self. Can I find the self who's actually unlovable? Or can all I find really is some evidence of it? And then we might also work with the anxiety inquiry. So with the anxiety inquiry, we're looking at, where's the threat? So we look at those words, I'm unlovable, or I'm not worthy, whatever it is for you. We look at the words and we can hear them. Some people are more, they hear things more than see things. And it's just the way our brains are set up. It's just an individual thing. So some people can see the words. It's like you can see them in your mind's eye, I am unlovable. Or you can put them up like they're on a poster board or something and look at them. We can see the font, the shapes, the size, the colors. Other people, it's more that they hear the words. There's something that feels kind of threatening about those sounds. And we work with them in a very specific way. So if it's the words as they're written out, what about those words feels uncomfortable or threatening? Does it feel like those words could hurt you? Does it feel like you have a response to the words? And so if we have a response, what kind of a response is it? It might be other words. It might be images, memories, which could be either still pictures or video clips. And definitely it would have some kind of an energetic resonance in the body. And then we work with those in specific ways to take the charge off of them so that they no longer mean what they start off meaning in the beginning. And then the compulsion inquiry, which directly relates to addiction, of course, is the one where we look to see where is the compulsion to do something. So where is the compulsion for me to have an ice cream cone? It might come up as, a sensation in my throat. It might come up as, well, everybody else gets to have ice cream. Why can't I have ice cream? It might come up in all kinds of ways. Oftentimes it'll be an image, and then we'll have a look at it and say, okay, let's look at that picture. And we might put a frame around it so we notice it's a picture. It's not actually happening. We can, tune into the space around it. We can go into the energy. It all ends up in the energy in our body. What's going on in the energy in our body? And does that somehow feel threatening? And when we get into the energy, then that's when we can start to kind of mine it for what the stored material is. And as we get into that, then other words and images might come up, memories might come up, and then we can release the Velcro, which is the attachment of the thoughts to the energy. And then when that releases, then the compulsion isn't as strong.
Okay, thank you. So I know that your other training, like the Himalayan breath practice, that it's been a part of your life for a long time, also informs what you're doing here. Can you say a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. So the nervous system is very much affected by our experiences. If we have experiences of being hurt or being scared, our nervous system kind of tightens up. We get contraction through the neck and the shoulders. We might get this tight jaw going on, get that clenching in the gut. And our breath is very much affected by that. So oftentimes people will start to hold their breath. So instead of breathing in and then letting it go and breathing out and then letting it go and letting it come back in, we'll get into a pattern of holding our breath. So it might be like, and then we don't even let out our breath. And so that's a very common pattern of breathing with anxiety. And with depression, it's more on the other side, is we breathe out, like, and then we don't really breathe in again for a bit. So the most down-regulating or calming way to breathe is diaphragmatic, using the diaphragm muscle. So with anxiety, it's often quite tight up in the chest. And to have the breath be continuous and smooth and even, so we're not having those jerkiness, the breaks in the breath. And when we're able to down-regulate and calm our nervous systems through the breath, then we're more able to have a internal environment that feels safe enough to be present in. So I do a lot of work with the breath because it's good for our nervous system. We can settle and we can allow ourselves to release a lot of the stress just through the breath. And also it's a really good clue. So if we're noticing that our breath or our body, our body gets often very tight too. If we notice that that's happening, then it's a clue to go, okay, what's going on? Obviously there's something disturbing me. I'm afraid, I'm nervous, I'm upset. And then we can use inquiry to look into that.
Great. So, and I know you have a group every day at 5:30 a.m. California time.
It's at 5 a.m. California time.
5 a.m.
Yeah, I have a free online daily practice group, and anyone is welcome to come. You can get that information on my website, lynnfraserstillpoint.com, and we'll post that at the end too. And I got inspired to do this just about 2 years ago now. We meet every day of the week. There's usually, 6 to 10 people, so it's a nice small group. And we just meet, and if someone has an idea of something that they want to look at, an inquiry, for instance, and we'll do that. There's always an element of meditation somehow, natural rest, breathing, relaxation, and then we'll often do an inquiry as well. And sometimes we just look into. I'm just trying to think of some examples. So some recent examples we were looking at today, we were looking at appreciative joy. So the feeling we have when something good happens with somebody, and sometimes we don't feel 100% on board with that. We might feel a bit jealous or something. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at the words, we're looking at the pictures, and we're noticing the energy in our body. We did one a few weeks ago, I am powerful, getting in touch with our female energy. And we do lots on different being open to happiness, all kinds of things. So some of what we do in those morning practices is we do natural rest practices where we really look. One of the things in natural rest for addiction that Scott talks about right at the beginning is to learn how to rest. And what that means, or one way that we can access that, is that we can watch thought coming up. So if people were to just do that right now, so you would just tune into your body, into your experience, notice your breath. And then we're going to watch thought and see what happens. So notice that when we first start watching thought, oftentimes it's like a kid being watched. They notice and they stop. So there might not be a thought come up for a moment, but just breathe and relax and notice what happens in your thought stream. And sometimes thoughts will come up individually. Often it's somewhere around the forehead, somewhere behind the forehead. So we notice that it comes in. We don't exactly hear the words like we would someone has spoken out loud, but we might hear them in our head, in our mind. And then sometimes that'll turn into a train of thought. So we might not even notice for a few minutes that we've gone into a train of thought. Then we can kind of trace it back, go, okay, I started with this thought. How did I get to over here? So the practice is to watch the thoughts come up. So obviously there's some different part of the mind that can observe what's happening in the thought stream. And watch the thoughts come up and then see if you can just allow an individual thought to settle and stop and then rest in that gap. And then we continue to watch and another thought will come up and then let that settle and then rest in the gap. And when we do that over and over and over again during the day, then we develop the capacity to be present with our experience as it's happening right now. And that's the same as when we're learning meditation. A lot of times we're learning to relax and breathe. And if we do that even for a minute or two, and we do it repeatedly during the day, then over time we get to be more familiar with and more comfortable with silence and with the stillness inside. And when we're not able to do that, oftentimes it's because there's a clamor of thoughts that are going on that we never pay attention to because we always keep ourselves so busy. And then those come forward. The second we have, a few minutes of silence, those thoughts come forward. And if that's what's happening, then that would be a good way to look at them, is through the living inquiries practice.
With addiction or even anything that people come to you with, are there people that have trouble doing this at first? Like, seems like it requires a certain amount of ability to observe oneself and one's inner state. So are some people not able to do this?
There is a certain readiness or willingness that needs to happen in order for someone to feel like this work is even possible. So I wouldn't ever say that every single person would even want to do this work. A lot of people aren't drawn to it at all. But part of the reason that we're not drawn to it is that we don't have the experience that it's safe to do it. So in the inquiries where, we do a lot of work around, this is how it works, you can do it yourself, so people can self-facilitate. But when there's something that's kind of intense, maybe there's some trauma, there's an addiction that feels like it's really out of control, it's really helpful to have somebody else there with you. So we're not doing therapy with people, we're helping people hold the space to do their own looking. And whatever it is that comes up is what comes up. And what I've experienced is that over time, we get to have the confidence that we can survive the experience of being present with whatever it is that's coming up. And when we do that, then we have more willingness to actually stay present with it. Because if we have a situation come up that at the time that it happened was overwhelming and that we pushed aside for some reason, it got stored in our body as trauma, then why would we think that that's a good thing to go back and have another look at it? Because it was overwhelming the first time. There's a reason that we pushed it away. And now the difference is that we're not in the situation anymore. So a lot of this stuff that comes up was formed from childhood. We have a lot more agency now than what we did then. And we have some tools to work with it. So we can stay with our breath. We can notice that this is coming in as a certain kind of picture. And then we can work through the different ways that we work with pictures to see, okay, that's a picture. That's something that happened in the past. It's not something happening now. But we have some tools that will help people to stay in that observer perspective so that it's not overwhelming them.
So what's the difference between this and just meditating?
Meditating there are some commonalities between the two. Certainly the awareness of the body, the breath, the energy in the body. Yoga has more of an emphasis on the energy in the body and moving the energy through the body than straight meditation does. Meditation is getting in touch with the stillness underneath the layer of thought. And the inquiries are looking at the layer of thought as it is Velcroed to the energy in the body. And as those become unstuck and they start to dissolve, then there's a lot more space in the body. And the space in the body and the energy in the mind, then it's just a lot quieter in there. And then we can actually go into meditation in a way that we might have not been able to do before. I actually had one person who was in the daily practices, and she came quite a bit for about 6 months. And she said it took her about 6 months to actually make it through a whole practice without her mind just wandering all the time. So it's the nature of our mind to wander away. And so partly what we're doing in meditation is to train the mind to stay, but also when the mind wants to get away because something doesn't feel safe, then we're going to do what we need to do to keep ourselves safe. And the inquiries can increase that level of safety. One of my favorite quotes is by a trauma researcher, and it's safety is the treatment. So if we have trauma or if we have something that we're trying to get away from, we need to feel safe in order for us to actually look at that and to release it. We don't, that some of the ways that people work with addiction and with people with addiction are quite aggressive, and they have to bottom out and we need to make them face the consequences and all that stuff. So when we feel safe and we're in an environment where we're supported in our looking, then our natural inclination to drop addictions or to treat ourselves better will come forward. So for myself, what I noticed, I also have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I was assaulted in 2005 when I was riding my bike to work. And when that happened, I had been meditating for about 12 years at the time. So I knew a lot about my mind and my body and the energy, but I was completely unprepared for the flashbacks and the intrusive thoughts and the energy of it. It was it was traumatic when something like that happens. And over time, what I've noticed is that as I've healed from that, and sometimes I'm more easily triggered into fear than I would be if it hadn't happened to me. So, our system remembers these things. But that as I've healed, then my natural interest in life has come back. I'm not so interested in, reading trashy novels or watching Netflix or something, because I have a life that I'm interested in, and it's exciting, and I'm alive, and I have people I want to connect with. But when I'm in that real shut down kind of a place, which is so common with trauma and so common with addiction, then everything just seems like it's too much. So we need to find a way to be able to be with our experience. And something like this process of the living inquiries has been really helpful.
Yeah, you raised a really good point there, that I think when we're depressed or anxious or using numbing out substances, like our world gets very, very narrow. And
it really does.
Yeah, that we're not doing that which would make our lives, would enrich our lives. And seems like it's an important part of recovery, what you're saying, to gain that vitality back. Right. And begin doing things that feed our soul.
Yeah, because the safest place is alone in our room doing something that numbs us out. There's no risk that we're going to be hurt by somebody else. It's really protected and safe, but that's not a life. And our nervous system might be going, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. We might get hurt by that. But our nervous system doesn't have to control our life either. Like, we can work with our nervous system and calm it down. We can do breathing practices and all these things. We can do something like the inquiries, where we're actually releasing the Velcro and releasing some of those traumatic experiences. And it's really exciting, the people that I work with, to see the difference as people's nervous systems start to settle down, and we start to really see, okay, that energy that I used to just be terrified of, I see what that's about. There's these memories, these people that were telling me whatever it was they were telling me, and that's not actually true. And I can see now that that's just a memory. At the time, absolutely, it was overwhelming. I had no power as a child. I couldn't get out of it. And so I did whatever I had to do to get out of it. You know, whether I started going into fantasy and dissociation, or whether I acted out, or as soon as we have it available, oftentimes people will use drugs, alcohol. There's all kinds of acting out that we do to not be present with it, but it's possible for everybody. And, you know, I never would have thought, looking back on my life, I never could have predicted that I would have the freedom now that I have, because I had, you know, I had a lot of awareness around it. I didn't know much about trauma, which I found it very helpful to learn more about trauma because it's made a lot of sense. But also with the inquiries, you know, there's the core deficiency stories, there's the resistance and how to work with resistance. Most people don't want to be present with this, but it's because we don't feel like we can. And so part of what I've done is I've taken my training as a meditation teacher and the experience that I've had with that over 20 years. And then this last 5 years of working individually with people and in groups. And I've kind of combined that into a really practical way to work with ourselves. And so the people that I work with have that confidence, because I have the confidence. I know that there's nothing inherently wrong with any of us. I know that in every cell of my body. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. We have some habits. We have some habits of the mind that might be really difficult. We have some energy in our body that might not feel comfortable. But all of us can work with that. And all of us can release that and solve that. And then we end up with the space that we can actually think, well, what do I want to do with my life? What do I, you know, in some ways, I wish I'd learned that before I was in my mid 60s, but at least I know it now. So that's okay with me.
Better late than never, or not at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So it seems like you just defined some of the elements of recovery, being more at choice, having more vitality. What else are the signs of recovery for you?
I think it would be that ease and the confidence. So there's nothing that we have to avoid anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with direct experience. It really only comes with direct experience. So if we have the experiences of sitting in inquiry or with a facilitator, or however it is that we have the experiences, that we can have energy to come up that's difficult to be with, and we can look at it. One of the questions that we sometimes ask in the anxiety inquiry is that energy here to hurt me? And it might feel like it is, but when we actually look, every single time people will say things like, it's here to warn me, it's here to protect me. And so this thing that we've been avoiding all of this time through addictions is actually just our own system going, hey, we need some help here. So once people have that experience, that the energy, no matter how intense it is, the energy in their body is not here to hurt them, then it opens up the space where we can actually have a look at it. So that, I think, to me, is the core of it. It doesn't matter how you get to that point where you have that confidence, but once you get it, then everything becomes workable.
So it's like making friends with your own system, which I think you have a book, something like that title.
I do. It's called Friends with Your Mind, How to Stop Torturing Yourself with Your Thoughts. And it has a lot of stuff about the living inquiries in it. It has a lot of stuff about meditation and nervous system, how to work with trauma, all that stuff. It's a very simple book. Anybody could pick it up and understand the basics just from that book.
Nice. Is that an ebook?
Yes, you can get it on Amazon. It's a Kindle book, or you can get a print copy of it. And there's quite a few practices from the book that are on my YouTube channel. And my website, lynnfraserstillpoint.com, has links to a lot of that. I also do courses on the book. We just finished a 4-week course recently, and we've got another one coming up in September, and where we get together in a small group of, you know, a dozen or so people, and we just really work with the principles of Okay, I have a lot of anxiety in my mind. How do I work with that? How do I actually come to a place where I'm kind and compassionate with myself? That's such a big issue for so many people, is that we have such habits of condemning ourselves and shaming ourselves. And there's ways to work with that, to let that go. And that directly relates to addiction, because that's part of what we're trying to get away from, is that feeling of there's something wrong with me, and that voice that's always judging us.
It seems like a vicious cycle. Like the more we judge ourselves, the more pain we're in, and the more we want to numb that. And so you're intervening in that cycle and
Mhm.
encouraging a more friendly relationship with one's inside experience and thought.
Right. And the more we're addicted and the more we're doing those kinds of behaviors, the more social stigma we face as well. So if we can, everybody admires the person who made it out of addiction, and we cured ourselves and we're a productive member of society and all that stuff. And we shame people who are struggling. And so whether that's somebody who's, a fairly low level abuse of some kind, some substance or process, we tend to just have this idea that we should all be able to be perfect. And we have these lists in our head that I didn't even realize were there until I started doing the inquiries, of all the ways in which I should be perfect and all the ways that I'm not meeting that. And so part of what we do in the inquiries too is we look at that kind of thing and we go, okay, I'm feeling like I'm letting myself down or I'm not good enough. How do I know that? Like, what would it actually look like if I was to approve of myself? What would I have to do or be like? Well, if we have a list in our head that says, well, always calm, never have a negative thought, never feel jealous, never, that's not ever going to happen. We're human beings. And
Mm.
so it's so helpful to look and see, okay, that's what was operating underground. That's what's going on with that. And then once we can release it, then it's not driving us anymore.
Sounds like, watching how the sausage is made, deconstructing one's experience into its basic, um, deconstructing perception into its basic elements, and it sort of falls apart. And when
Right.
you do that, it can't hold together.
Mhm. And the energy in the body is what makes it feel so real. Like most people can see pretty easily that those words, okay, the words are just shapes. And they might seem threatening because they're, big black heavy letters or something. And the image is okay if we do the processes that we do with them, we might see, okay, I can see that that's a collection of colors and shapes, basically, that my brain is saying this is dangerous or something dangerous about it. But we can put it out, we put a frame around it, we can look at the space around it. We can kind of see more easily that words and pictures aren't the problem, it's the energy in our body. But the energy in our body is inside of us. And so we have a more personal relationship with it in some ways. And if we can't become friends with our body and with the energy in our body, then we're really trapped into having to get away. Because who wants to stick around to be verbally abused or ashamed or whatever it is that we do to ourselves? Nobody does. And so then we're naturally going to do something that makes us feel better. And if that's some kind of an addictive process or an addictive substance, then that can lead to all kinds of problems. And it doesn't ever address the real root of it, which is that we're trying to get away from ourselves.
So what would you say is a normal course of treatment? Like how many sessions would somebody have to start seeing changes?
Well, that's an individual thing. I have one person that came once and then came back a year later, and he said, "Man, that session, it just changed everything. I have a girlfriend now. A whole bunch of stuff just disappeared." And then he had another session because he wanted to work on something else. That's not the norm. Normally, I would see people a lot more frequently or more often than that. But generally speaking, if people have a lot of unresolved trauma, then it will take a lot longer, a lot more sessions, because it takes longer for us to feel safe and to feel like it's okay for us to actually pay attention and look at that. And usually people will come, once or twice a week for some period of time and then start to gradually taper it off. And then they might come back every once in a while. And usually people will learn, and the process is very simple. You could just learn it out of the book, out of Scott's Natural Rest book, out of his Unfindable Inquiry book, as well as my Friends with Your Mind book. So it's not that the process is hard, it's that we can't stay focused on it because there's some kind of intensity there.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, when I was first doing this, I had a lot of trauma that I needed to work through. And I went every week for quite a long time, a couple of years. And then over that time, I just noticed such a difference and such a freedom that I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to keep looking at it. And I did a certain amount of work on my own with it, but it felt too traumatic to really go in, because I was always kind of worried that, well, if I go into it on my own and something big happens, then I'm going to be in trouble. And what actually happens with that is that our survival system and our protective mechanisms, that's going to shut down. We're going to think about something else. We're going to dissociate. We're going to go, this is crap, whatever it is. And we're going to move away from it if that happens. That's my experience with it. And so I would say that people could do it in a supported way until they're feeling comfortable, and then they can often do it on their own. And then even after that, sometimes it's just good to have someone else kind of keep us on track and hold the space. So there's a real variety of how often people would benefit from it. And who doesn't enjoy, it's like going for a massage. Who doesn't enjoy having someone pay attention to us, and we have a safe container in which to do this kind of looking. And I find that that's been really helpful. I still get facilitated regularly.
Mhm. So are there any other areas that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
I think we've covered a lot. I think that, the one thing that I would say to anybody who is maybe struggling with addiction or struggling with trauma is that it's very helpful to understand more about our system and how it all works. One of the very, very helpful things for me was to learn about developmental trauma and to learn that neglect, not being cared for emotionally, is actually a very serious thing for a child. It feels life-threatening when someone's not paying attention to us. And when we're in trouble and nobody seems to notice, then we just kind of feel like we're completely on our own. We don't matter to anybody. And that has a certain effect. And so that was very helpful for me to know, because I don't have a lot of the kinds of trauma that people would think of trauma as childhood. I wasn't beaten, I wasn't sexually abused, I wasn't emotionally abused, none of that was happening. And yet I still got into the situation where I was traumatized from the outside, but in my own family, nobody noticed. And so that was really helpful for me to learn about developmental trauma in particular, and to learn about addiction and how all of that works. Like, I know now that it wasn't because I was stupid or evil or something that I started drinking and doing drugs. I was trying to feel better. And I was trying to feel connected, and we need social connection. And what I was doing was really counterproductive in many ways, but I didn't know any other way to try and get those needs met. So learning and understanding about addiction has also been really helpful to not stigmatize ourselves and to shame ourselves and other people for being human and for having experiences and then responding to those experiences. That's been a really important learning from me as well. And to have the confidence, every single person who wants to do this can do it. My mind, I used to be so compulsive. I used to have catastrophic thinking all the time. My shoulders were up here all the time. I mean, I was kind of a mess until probably around the time I started doing yoga meditation when I was around 40. And the last 5 years of doing the inquiries have been such a rich time for me, and so much has released. And I know that everybody can do it. If I can do it, I know that everybody can do it. And then you get to this place where there's openness and space, and you're interested in your life, and things are going well, and you have the space to be present with yourself and with other people. So I would really encourage people to know that it's possible, and that it's a process. It takes some time to unwind some of those habits that we have of judging ourselves, and that it's very possible to do that.
So, I mean, it sounds like there's probably a lot of us walking around at a subclinical level of anxiety and depression and addiction with our shoulders up to our ears and completely stressed out and feeling like we need a massage every day,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be classified as who wouldn't meet the DSM criteria for depression or anxiety or PTSD
Right.
that could still really benefit from the living inquiries and your breath work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times, it's interesting as you're studying this too, because some of the studies that have come out lately on depression are that breath work and working with the nervous system is actually equal or better effect than drugs to use to treat depression. And so it's good to know that there are methods to work with our nervous system and to enliven our body and to really address and release some of what's depressing our body, what's depressing our system, that don't have side effects. They're not a drug. They're not they're not something that we have to rely on an outside source for. And sometimes we need a chemical intervention for a while as to give us a space to work with it. And so that's fine too. I would never say that nobody, that everybody doesn't need some kind of assistance like that at times. But we have it's sad when so many of us are just kind of operating suboptimally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we can clear as we clear the trauma, as we clear these limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves. That's what starts to open up, is that our life just gets better. I went back to music recently. I'm playing flute in a jazz band, and it was totally scary because I'm improvising in public, a lot of things about that. I've got memories of being in high school band, which were very traumatic. And so there's a lot of stuff about it that was quite triggering. But I'm healthy enough now that I can do it and I can handle the discomfort of doing it. And it's so much fun. And so that's what can happen as we actually address our trauma and let that go, is that our life just opens up in a way that we never would have thought possible.
That's a beautiful example of picking something up after decades that gives you such joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been really fun.
Yeah. So what if someone's interested in your approach, like what would be a next step for people to reach you, to work with you?
Well, I would say to go to my website. So it's lynnfraserstillpoint.com. And we'll put that up here so you can see the spelling of it. Have a look at some of the courses, but the really important thing would be to start to come to the daily practices if you can. So it's at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So the people in California, it's pretty early for you. But actually several people from California come on a regular basis. And one of the things they say is, I never have another appointment. It gets in the way of coming. And in Europe, it's 1 o'clock in the UK. And so it's a time that works. I have someone from Australia that comes that it's evening for her. So hopefully that's a time that would work. And there's absolutely no pressure to come every day. But if you're interested at all, come. There's a nice group of people. Get to know people, and it's a safe environment for people to do some practice, do some down regulating of the nervous system, to learn some things, and to be part of a group that does that. And then there's courses and classes and all kinds of things too that people can participate in, and you can find that all on the website too.
So they would sign up for the morning meditation on your website?
No, they can just go on the website and find the Zoom link. Zoom is similar to Skype, and they can just click the link at the time and they're right in the meeting.
Oh, okay. So then no sign up or
No
anything?
sign up. No, I don't even need your email or anything. And if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about what we do there, if you go to my YouTube channel, which is Lynn Fraser Stillpoint, a lot of the practices on there were recorded during those morning sessions. So people can get an idea from that.
Okay. So they can watch YouTube videos and check it out before they actually come.
Yep.
So thanks for spending time today, Lynn, explaining more about your work. I think people can really benefit from checking out your group and from working with you. It's fascinating what you're doing with people, and your stories about yourself are very encouraging, and your commitment to this daily group is amazing, and I know that a lot of people appreciate it. So I wish you well.
Well, thank you, Kay. It's been wonderful to have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about it. Thank you. Go to kilobicenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, to see the full schedule of speakers and to register to watch these free online September 23rd and 24th
in the Radical Recovery Summit 2017.